So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another free-for-all and to a return to the original Mountain Pass map from which we got, well, what we got from vanilla, I should say. This is the original Mountain Pass. There have been many maps that have been similar to this one, but this has been the one that's been in the game for the longest amount of time. It really does lend itself quite well to a number of types of engagement, but free-for-all is quite popular on this one because there are a number of routes that you can take. Also, there's a number of ways in which you can approach it. There are a few more open areas that you can use for more fast-moving units like cavalry. There's obviously the more choke-pointy elements which are going to be involved in any mountainous map because there's going to be the passes that you have to take. The terrain as well is a very big feature on a map like this. As much as there have been very many maps that have been made in the time since this one still has one of the highest levels of varying elevations on a map. Like you see, the areas up here have got very high areas and it extends right down into the valley basins that you can see down here. Nonetheless, we will get into the various armies, seeing as this is a map that everyone kind of knows what is what on. So we shall go through the army compositions now. Obviously we did a free-for-all not too long ago, albeit that was with only 3 armies on the field, and there was... Three-way free-for-alls are always an interesting one in the sense that they can be a little bit more difficult to balance because effectively it's the player who stays out of combat the longest who wins. That wasn't necessarily the case in that particular battle. It was a little bit more bizarre than that, but very often that does turn out to be true. In battles where there are 4 players at the very least, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to sort of sit on the sidelines and wait it out in that manner. But this battle I should say, was sent to me by Beastie70, who's going to be playing as Dole Amroth. An interesting choice on a map like this. You can rely on your cavalry a little bit more perhaps as Dole Amroth than you can as certain other factions, but their infantry has got a few notable gaps in it, and while they do have some good infantry, you could say that even their good infantry is maybe a little bit too expensive for what it offers in certain situations. A catapult is a good enough choice on a map like this though, as much as you could expose yourself if you're in lower terrain such as Dol Amroth are and could get it sniped out. The benefits far outweigh the risks in this sort of situation. If you can get it into a good position, the catapult can be exactly the sort of thing which wins you the battle just by its very presence. It can also affect how the enemy decides to try and move towards you, or perhaps tries to avoid you, of course. The Thalon men-at-arms are a basic man-at-arms unit. They're not going to be the source of Dol Amroth winning this battle by any means, but they give them a solid enough centre. The armour upgrade means that they're going to be fairly resilient, but like most of the Western Kingdoms of men in their sort of standard line infantry units, they're very functional at what they do. Their defensive values are good, but they don't really have the attack values to be able to go with that to make them into really good all-round units, which is what the higher tier line infantry units are capable of doing. They're much more the shield rather than the sword of your armies. We have the dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan. This is one of those units which is kind of intriguing in the sense that it is a multiple HP unit. It's reasonably tanky, but stats-wise it's not going to be up to the same level as a lot of other bodyguard units. Yes, you can bring 2, but they're still individually very expensive. So they make for a good supporting unit in a combined arms front line, which Dole Amroth do rely on if they are going to try and contest an infantry fight against other factions, but do bear in mind that they're not going to be quite the same tour de force that a lot of other multiple HP units are. They're much more designed to be part of a more cohesive force rather than just the be-all and end-all on their own. Speaking of which, one unit that you can put them with and be very effective is the Athalon Halberdiers, one of the key units in Dol Amroth really, because it is actually an area in which they hold a little bit of an advantage over many of the other Western Kingdoms of men. The Athalon Halberdiers are a very effective front line. The armour piercing can be very useful against the right opponents, and obviously they make for a decent anchor provided they don't get shot up or get pushed out of the way by superior pikes. Belfast Marines, good choice in a map like this as well. On this kind of map, javelins can be exactly the sort of thing to help you push through difficult terrain. Speaking of which, Dol Amroth have got the long march uphill into Harad if they decide to go on the offensive, but I doubt they will, because stuff like the Dorwinion archers, even when they have a bit of a terrain disadvantage like in this situation, Dol Amroth will still fancy their chances in a skirmish fight against Harad. Harad, however, with all their armour piercing, will be pretty good against these other units of Athalon men-at-arms they have here, and the armour piercing from the Athalon Halberdiers is not going to be as useful maybe as Beastie was hoping for against his most immediate foe. A Thalond Man-at-Arms, I should say. The Black Swan Renegades here, again, a unit which can be very effective against armoured forces, but Harad significantly less focused on their armoured units than many others. Unit of civilians to help bolster the ranks, and more dismounted knights, the Silver Swan archers, and of course Dol Amroth brought some cavalry. Perithil riders, fast moving around the field, not going to do tons of damage to individual units, but just having this cavalry around and being able to flee with at least something is useful in a free-for-all and can be the difference between victory and defeat in the long run. And of course the incredibly tanky Haven Knights, one of the better units of melee cavalry that the game has to offer. Now then, moving on to Harad, who have got a much more condensed formation. We have MG Mac. He has got some Haradrim archers and Haradrim spearmen, so going for at least an element of his army being a little bit more numerous. Basic Haradrim units are of course not going to be a match for Dol Amroth in melee or at range, but they do give you the added numbers that you may need in a elongated campaign, and free-for-alls can be that, although this isn't the longest in terms of the total frame, so I imagine it's going to be quite a violent affair, and with units like Demons of the Desert on the field, that's not too surprising. If you can shoot through a pretty dense formation, the Demons of the Desert can be one of the units in the game capable of dishing out one of the highest levels of DPS. Not as much as something like the Witchers, for example, but it's honestly not far off if you can get sustained fire on them. But again, much like the Witchers, they can be kept at arm's length relatively easily, and unlike the Witchers, they're actually more difficult to hide because you can very easily see them coming. We've got some Trollmen of Harad, some Southron Pikemen. Obviously the Trollmen very, very effective against forces like Dol Amroth on foot. Southron Pikemen will give them an anchor, but they probably need more than one unit to be fully effective. They do have two, I suppose. More Trollmen, more Muhard Beast Hunters and Warriors, and they also have a unit of War Beasts of Harad, which is an interesting little inclusion, this. Very effective off the charge, but again, cavalry is kind of balanced weird in Reforged at the moment, and it has been for quite a while, but the War Beasts of Harad can be a really effective battering ram, doing a lot of damage really very, very quickly, causing panic in the enemy ranks, but they're also a unit which, as long as you have anti-cavalry in the way and as long as you're doing damage to them consistently, they will wither pretty quickly. Their hit points are really the only thing that gives them survivability, much in the same way as a Berserker unit. Speaking of which, Muhard Berserkers. Not a traditional multiple HP kind of unit that, but still armor piercing. Useful. And then finally, we have two forces who are willing to meet each other in the open field over here. So one 1v1 initially is going to happen in the mountains. One is going to happen in more open terrain over here. We have Justin JJ1, who's playing as Dorwinion. He has got some Morroquendi bows who are already in range of Arthedain across the way. Some Elvalin marksmen as well. So a good ranged core this of some heavier archers and some elven archers. So Arthedain are not going to be able to sit back for too long. Otherwise they're going to take pretty hefty damage at the hands of these Morroquendi, especially if they can focus down stuff like the Arthedain pikes. That'll be really nasty. We've got some Elvalin infantry backed up by some Morroquendi pikes as well, so if they can whittle away Arthedain's phalanx, then they should have the edge here, because while the Morroquendi are not in as high numbers, Elven pikes are very, very effective, of course. They are in short supply in Reforged. I believe there are only 3 units of such, actually, but Morroquendi pikes are actually the most affordable of them, but they're still very effective. Nandor Glade Riders, very good off the charge. There's a unit of them on both flanks. Do they have the Knights as well, I wonder? No, they don't. Just the Glade Riders then, which is kind of interesting. There may be some hidden units for Dorwinion around here as well. I'd be surprised not to see any Keldon River Patrol pop up at some point, but still a good position. Expensive, and they've invested quite a lot in their archers, so if Arthedain are willing to be aggressive here, they could reap the benefits of that potentially, which is Parthen of Barsu. He has got some Arthedain marksmen. I mean, he can contest the ranged fight, but he's not going to win it with the terrain being what it is, and the fact that the Morroquendi are going to have the first shots. Civilians are here. We've got some upgraded Arthedain men-at-arms, which are all well and good, but very similar to the Elvalin infantry, really, and the Thalon men-at-arms we've already seen, just rank and file. Dismounted Fornos Terrain Knights are a cut above, though. If they can get in and amongst things, even against the Elven pikes once their formation is broken, these heavy swordsmen will do a lot of damage, but I would also imagine they're going to be one of the first things targeted down by the Dorwinion archers. Certainly the Arthedain pikemen will, armour upgrade or no. They won't withstand Elven arrow fire too well. Arthedain man-at-arms, pikemen, Arthedain marksmen. They do have some Wardens of the North, which if they move forward could focus down individual targets, but again, they're more of an individual unit killer rather than a skirmishing archer, which is true really of any armour-piercing archer. They're too valuable to be using their ammunition on just basic archers. Even the Morroquendi bows, it's not really worthwhile. Dismounted Knights of Anubis make for a good core to your line as well, a very strong bodyguard unit defensively. He's actually got 2 units of them, which is a big investment, but certainly in terms of pure infantry muscle, Arthedain do have the edge here, and especially with the Anubis Gate Guards as well, they've got a really good anchor, but if they dither for too long, Dorwinion will be the victors there. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road as the Morroquendi bows open up on Arthedain, shall we? So with the Morroquendi bows opening up on the Arthedain position here, although that was actually a blank shot, so maybe, well, the other unit is still firing away, but maybe they don't have range on the kind of unit they would want to be firing at initially, and firing into the front of these Arthedain man-at-arms is certainly not what Dorwinion want to be doing, because this is one of the units which Arthedain would certainly want to take this ammunition. They would still die, of course, in fairly high numbers, but the armour and shields, and also the fact that they're just not as important as a unit in melee. Meanwhile, the Nandor Glade Riders coming down here, softened up first of all by a volley or two from the Morroquendi bows up on the hill, and they will get a clean charge here into these Arthedain marks. In fact, for the first part of the battle, I think we will go down to half speed, because the Dol Amroth Harad confrontation over on the other side is also going to be getting underway. Certainly, though, Dorwinion should be going after these pikes. This is something which a lot of people, I mean, it doesn't come up that often, but pikes, when they're in standard formation, they can't sprint, but their standard move speed, walk speed essentially, is actually greater than that of normal units. So if you walk both units, the pikes will actually start to pull out in front of the shielded units you're trying to cover them with, which can be a bit of an annoyance, but it's just something that you have to learn to work with. Meanwhile, over here, unsurprisingly, Dole Amroth are going to be getting in position with their archers. I mean, a unit like the Serpent's Fangs is going to be here to skirmish with them. Interestingly enough, though, Harad going to be taking up a pretty nasty position up here on the high ground. I mean, they can pretty much shoot freely into the Dole Amroth force once they take that position. So Dole Amroth might not actually have the luxury of taking the slower approach after all if they want to stop Harad from getting up there anyway. They could always enlist the help of whoever wins the Dorwinion Arthedain struggle over here, but I would hazard a guess to say that whoever wins over here is going to be damaged enough to the point where they won't necessarily want to be the cannon fodder for someone else's plans. Nandor Glade Riders, of course, continuing to mow through these Arthedain marksmen, and there's really no saving them at this point. I mean, it is interesting to note that Arthedain don't actually have anything in the way of mounted units on the field today. They only have stuff like Wards of the North and 2 units of dismounted Knights of Anubis, which are very expensive, of course. Wards of the North are shooting into the Nandor Glade Riders, which will kill them off pretty quickly, but it's not the kind of unit you would ideally be wanting to shoot your very valuable armour-piercing arrows into. Meanwhile, Morroquendi Stalkers have revealed themselves with a Horse Archer variant. That's effectively just a mounted version of the Morroquendi bows, so we're going to be seeing yet more pretty highly damaging poison projectiles find their way into the Arthedain soldiers as they move forward. Marksmen getting a lot closer civilians. I mean, this is certainly a situation so far which Dorwinion will be quite happy with. Oftentimes when it is, I think both of these players, I haven't seen them in replays before, so it's fairly safe bet to say that they're maybe on the slightly newer side. When it's two newer players facing off against one another, it's almost always the one that invests more into their ranged game and making the enemy come to them, which often ends up winning the day. And that may very well end up being the case here, so I would certainly put Dorwinion in the ascendancy in this particular fight, especially when you consider that their position allows their ranged units to be consistently useful, rather than when the melee engagement begins, all of their archers suddenly become significantly less effective. That won't actually be the case here. Another unit of poor Arthedain marksmen getting flattened by the other unit of Nandor Glade Riders. Meanwhile, over on the other side we have the Warbeasts of Harad. We actually missed a charge from them. Look to have been decently effective. I mean, there's a fair amount of dead Athalon men-at-arms on the floor and only one dead Warbeast, so this is potentially a situation where Harad can actually get the most out of their cavalry here. Dorwinion archers trying to whittle them down, but of course while their hit points are still up, it won't be the easiest thing to shoot. I mean, it does actually look like the Dorwinion archers are going after the Harad spearmen, which is not exactly the most high profile of targets, but it's better than nothing, I suppose. Interesting to see what this catapult decides to target down. Going after these units which are up on the hillside over here. A narrow miss there. The other one's going to hit the cliff wall as well, but is this one going to hit? Nope, it's going to go long, so Fortuitous for Harad, but they will at least now know that Dol Amroth are intending to hit their better units with the catapult, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Ashari Shadows as well. Ranger class units, very, very dangerous. Beast of Harad's going to march in again. There's no real anti-cavalry on this front line. They need to get some of their halberdiers forward. They've only got one unit so far, but that can only cover so much of the front line, and the stakes are also only going to cover the middle. And worst of all here, the Athalon men-at-arms are actually going to leave open the charge for the Black Swan Renegades, which are a more high-ticket unit. That is going to hurt. Off the charge is where the War Beasts can really earn their keep. Didn't actually look to be as effective as I was fearing there, so Dole Amroth maybe got away with one slightly, because that could have been utterly devastating. Well, Moribund Stalkers moving around to the side, along with the Glade Riders. I mean, this is where Arthedain do want to be, because they were caught at range by the Dorwinion archers and it wasn't going all that well, but even so, with the Alvelin acting as the shields for the anchors that are the Moribund pikes here on this front line, I still don't really think Arthedain have got the muscle to be able to outdo Dorwinion here, especially when you consider that the Alvelin Hammer Guard are right in the middle over here as well, which are going to do really, really nicely against anything Arthedain have in melee, really, other than maybe the pikes, if the pikes can keep them at arm's length, but that isn't going to be the case in this situation. And so far it's looking to be a bit of an unmitigated disaster for Arthedain. They can move their Warns of the North forward now, but Dorwinion can afford to be pretty pleased with how they draw the enemy in and then allow the enemy force to just break on their front line is going, and also hammer and anvil strikes from the Glade Riders. So I mean, Dorwinion, it's kind of the classic example of drawing the enemy in here with your superior firepower, having a mostly defensive front line that just allows the enemy attack to bounce off them, and then getting some hammer and anvil strikes with a high charge cavalry unit. So the Nandor Glade Riders certainly in their natural habitat here, and Dorwinion will be feeling pretty confident about this, because by the time they get over to the other side of the battlefield, they'll be hoping that Dol Amroth and Harad have done some decent damage to one another, and the Arthedain pikemen do end up routing. So yeah, probably one of the most consummate victories you're likely to see in a sort of microcosm within a free-for-all there. I can only apologise if you can hear the wind outside, but there is actually a storm ongoing at the moment, which is rather interesting. Meanwhile, still rather only one unit of War Beasts of Harad harassing these Black Swan Renegades. I mean, the Black Swan Renegades are actually keeping the War Beasts within them, which is working out. I mean, that's a rather interesting thing to try and do. Very often it's not really possible to micro to that extent without losing your focus on things which may be a little bit more important, but that worked out very well there, and the War Beasts pretty much on their last legs at this point. You know, they're going to be taking hefty damage, their hit points are going to be pretty much gone, so that is worth bearing in mind as we move forward. The catapult doing some decent damage to this Harad front line, but these are all of the less important Harad units. I mean, you're killing them off in pretty high numbers. Harad Spearmen and Southron Pikemen, but Harad won't be too worried about that. That is the purpose behind bringing these more numerous units. Ashari Shadows, meanwhile, are they going after the catapult crew? They are, and they're killing the catapult crew off pretty quickly as well. Beastly Savanty's going to need to do something about those Harad mounted rangers. Meanwhile, oof, that is absolutely vicious. Riddled with arrows, the Arthedain general. This catapult is going to be lost, however. It's a little bit surprising actually that it took that long to notice. The catapult crew taking very hefty damage indeed. Again, like I said, it's not actually been the most effective in terms of value for money on the units they've been hitting thus far. Another charge, and then he goes flying over his mount there, which comes about as a result of the halberdiers being in there now, and the War Beast completely dealt with. Now then, there's actually still a little bit of Arthedain resistance being put up, and unsurprisingly, it is from the dismounted Knights of Anumas. Balance of forces is evenly matched. I'm not so sure about that one. I suppose there's no pikes to hold them at arm's length, so the only thing here, the Alvelin infantry and the Glade Guard, but Moribund Stalkers are going to charge into them now as well, and we've already seen somewhat recently that even horse archers can be effective as a cavalry unit. Very recently actually, in the case of Dorwinion with the other free-for-all we saw. again, not getting that many kills, but they don't necessarily need to here. And it'll be interesting to see what Dorwinion does from here, because if they just hang out over here in this part of the map, it'll be very obvious to Harad and Dol Amroth what Dorwinion is trying to do, just keep out of it for as long as possible. Whereas if they at least make the effort to come over here and try and get involved, they can keep the attention off themselves at least temporarily. Haradrim archers in a good position, very, very basic as far as archers go, but they can't have any return fire find its way to them. So this is all free damage. And again, this is a bit of a puzzle for Dol Amroth to try and work out, because it's not even as if they can double back and go right the way around, because if they do, they'll find themselves coming face to face with the Dorwinion army. The Athalon Halberdiers taking hits from up on high as well from the Serpent's Fangs. Which are over there, another poison projectile unit. Yeah, if I were Dol Amroth, yeah, he is. He's moving backwards and he's going to get into a different defensive position, which is completely understandable, because, I mean, looking at this, Harad can't be too annoyed that Dol Amroth aren't attacking into them, because at this point the window of opportunity Dol Amroth had to try and make life a little bit more difficult for Harad in this sense has passed. It needed to be a very quick, brutal initial hit that stopped Harad from transitioning freely up onto that cliffside. As it is, that did not transpire. Charging forward now, trying to meet the Dol Amroth retreat, but Black Swan Renegades here, I mean, it's only Haradrim archers making up the initial waves. Shari Shadows, Haradrim Spearmen moving forward. 2 units of them. They're going to need some units of more genuine quality than this to be able to dislodge a Dol Amroth force that includes Black Swan Renegades. Parathil Riders against the Hashari Shadows, but the Shadows have got more numbers. Haradrim archers are also just spilling through the lines, causing the routing of the Dorwinion archers, and this is also going to mean the overrunning of the Black Swan Renegades. And there they go. Routing, so that ended up working out pretty well also. So Dol Amroth struggling here in this at this juncture in the game. The question now is what Harad are going to be doing. I mean, like I said, it's not the longest battle in terms of frames, this, considering Mountain Pass free-for-alls, even when it's just 1 player per team, they can end up lasting quite a long time with the defensive positions the armies can take up, but I can only assume Harad are not going to maintain their defensive position and instead are going to attack into Dol Amroth. Dorwinion archers have returned from routing, but they may be convinced to go right back to routing if the Hashari Shadows continue to charge in and out. They must be out of ammunition. I mean, I suppose, is the catapult completely gone? I mean, it doesn't really matter at this point. They've had to leave the artillery piece behind. Yeah, 5 artillery crewmen routing. I can assume poison projectiles had something to do with that. Dol Amroth need to be careful about the kind of position they're taking up here, because Dorwinion are on their way through the gorge now. So what Dol Amroth are going to be attempting to do, I would imagine, and you can see they already have some archers up here, is to defend over here. Harad going to come from the position that Dol Amroth were initially taking up, and Dorwinion through the gap as well. And this may end up being quite a violent 3-way struggle based on the time that remains in this battle. Up here on the high ground, yeah, I think Harad can't reach all the way over there, can't even see all the way over there because of the mists that have descended. The chanting of the Trollman. I don't actually think chant is an active ability they have, unless I'm very much mistaken. Maybe I'm wrong. Routing units, routing all over the place, routing towards the enemy. It's always amusing when Medieval 2's AI does that. The enemy are fleeing to their lives by charging directly into the lines of their foes. And that's going to be the end of this unit of Athalon Halberdiers. Didn't actually take any losses here, which is, I guess, a sign of how weak and feeble the Haradrim archers are in melee. Artillery crewmen are a little bit of an easier target in that regard. Dorwinion archers, only 26 of them. Parathil Riders still routing, so I mean, if the idea behind Dol Amroth's early game was to maybe feign a little bit of weakness, I can understand where they're coming from, but I don't know about that. I mean, I think they've There were some units they didn't really need to commit, like the Perithil Riders, which could have been really useful later on. Dorwinion moving back. I mean, this is going to be an interesting test for Dorwinion as well. All they really needed to do was maintain their position and use their skirmish as well. The cavalry was the only thing that really required a little bit of brain power to utilise from Dorwinion's initial crushing victory over Arthedain. Now, however, they are going to have to be moving forward to some extent or another. Is Arthedain completely gone? Nandor Glade Riders? Not completely. Arthedain do still have some manner of presence on the field. Wardens of the North, pikemen, men-at-arms, and then 3 marksmen. I mean, to be fair, in the late game, if all the enemies are very, very weak, then something like the Wardens of the North is strong enough of a unit to be able to deal with that. But with Nandor Glade Riders ready to charge into them as they cross the plains, I highly doubt they will be allowed the kind of victory that they are going to have to try and aim for now. Dorwinion archers awaiting Harad getting into a close enough range for them to be able to start doing their damage. Down here, civilians making up the classic cannon fodder of the Western Kingdoms. I have to say, for a battle with only 19k frames in it on the mountain pass, I wasn't expecting there to be a lull in proceedings quite so heavy as this. So at some point all hell is going to break loose, I would assume. Indeed, Dorwinion are starting to make their way forward now, leading the way with their bows. Interesting to see how much ammunition Dorwinion have left after the savaging they gave the Arthedain infantry with them. Harad spears, I mean, this is where again you can see that Harad has still got a lot of their very basic units down here, interspersed with a little bit of quality, so some of their trollmen there. Serpent's Fangs, the Demons of the Desert, of course, in the late game could also prove to be absolutely vital. Only bows are now in place. Who are they going to be firing at? Harad is who they're going to be firing at, which is interesting. Electing not to go after Dole Amroth. So that tells me that they are at least paying a little bit of attention, because Harad certainly had the better of the engagements between these two earlier on, although I probably wouldn't be going after these basic Haradrim archers. They're really not all that worth killing off, much in the same way as the Dole Amroth catapult did. Harad's lower tier units are in many ways doing their job by accepting all of this damage. Just in behind there are some Muhard warriors, some Ashari stalkers could also move forward and do some body piercing damage. Dorwinion archers shooting. Now this... what are they doing? If I were Dole Amroth, I would not be doing this, because it's very clear to me that Dorwinion wants to attack Harad. Let them do it. Dorwinion will take losses in so doing. Harad will obviously also take damage from Dorwinion's attack. There's no need. But as it is, it looks like Dol Amroth and Harad are actually double teaming Dorwinion now, which is a bit of a strange thing. That wasn't what I was expecting. I mean, Dorwinion are very much in position now at this point. Demons of the Desert getting into position. I mean, they do have a really good opportunity actually here to do some heavy damage here to units that include Morroquendi pikes, get rid of some of that heavy Dorwinion infantry as well. They're going after Elvelyn marksmen though, which again, not necessarily the most efficient target. We've seen quite a lot of that in this battle so far. Lots of high value ammunition being used on not exactly high priority targets, to put it mildly. Elvelyn marksmen are going to get charged also by the Ashari shadows, and the pikes are, well, I mean, some of the cavalry units, oof, that's a little bit more like it. Demons of the Desert slicing through the Elvelyn infantry and the Morroquendi pikes there. They're going to get into an even better position. Justin needs to reconsider his options here. To sit into a defensive position in your defensive line may have been good enough before, but it's certainly not going to be good enough when a player has this on their mind. Wow. These archers that are out of ammunition are being thrown well and truly under the bus by attacking Harad. This is actually a genuine free-for-all in the way that all three of the armies that are on display so far have been doing consistent damage to one another, rather than any concrete alliances being struck up. The Dorwinion cavalry is moving forward, which interestingly enough is the cue that Arthedain's units needed to break cover as well. Dol Amroth are moving forward, but maybe interested in a little bit of vengeance now, Dorwinion, going after Dol Amroth as they try to move forward. So it's really chaotic, this fight, but like I said, I feel as though this is benefiting Harad most of all. Thalon men-at-arms, they will make the front line, and they will at least be good enough to deal with Haradrim spearmen and Southron units pretty nicely. That's exactly the kind of units which these human man-at-arms units are actually pretty good at dealing with. Dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan here as well, dealing with the Morroquendi cavalry. Forward come the Nandor Glade Guard as Dorwinion collide with the Dole Amroth infantry, and I mean, also looks like Harad are going to move forward. I really appreciate this actually from Harad, because they could just sit back and allow Dorwinion and Dole Amroth to blunt themselves on one another, but moving in and getting involved makes this a genuinely extremely chaotic fight. With all three of these armies attacking one another to some extent or another. In melee now as well, the very dangerous Elval and Hammerguard, who would have been better off going after the Dole Amroth units rather than the Harad units, but it's only Muhards and Haradrim units, they'll be just fine at slicing their way, or smashing their way I should say, through them. A Thalon men-at-arms, as well as some dismounted Knights of Silver Swan. They'll be pretty good against most of these units at dealing damage, but the Trollmen are a different matter entirely, and they will eviscerate the Thalon men-at-arms, especially with the support of the Demons of the Desert coming in from the side as well. Got some Muhard Beast Hunters moving in. Dol Amroth starting to gain the upper hand against this Dorwinion force that move forward as well, so Dol Amroth probably going to be victorious here against Dorwinion. These Trollmen are forcing Dorwinion's archers onto the defence as well. Yeah, Trollmen and Black Swan Renegades, so I don't think Dorwinion is coming out of this looking all that great. But oh well. They are actually causing the routing of some of the more basic Harad units. Javelins hitting those of Thalon men-at-arms as well. The Haven Knights are still an interesting presence on the field. They may not be a unit of Lance Knights, but there's still going to be only so much that they're going to be able to do. They need to be careful about these pikes. They're going to be able to get through them just about. Serpent's Fangs are going to hit them as well. Haven Knights are now in behind the Harad lines, which is exactly where they wanted to be. Harad continue to push forward. And they're also going to be able to take advantage here of Dorwinion's remaining infantry to trap some of the Dole Amroth units in between them, including a unit of dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan. Thalon men-at-arms, another shower of javelins spews forth. Whose general is that? Is that Dorwinion's? Yes it was, I can see the purple cape. So Dorwinion's general does fall, as well as a few more of the Harad units. Needs to be careful again of this web of Southron pikemen, which is now strewn across the battlefield. They're going to charge in here. I mean, at this point certainly the Haven Knights should be looking at doing some damage to the ranks of the Harad infantry if they want to keep up the pressure here. Arthedain's still yet to make their grand reappearance. Over here, Muhard Beast Hunters getting into melee against the remnants of some men-at-arms units and this unit of Dorwinion Arch. I mean, they are armor-piercing, the Muhard Beast Hunters, but they've got little defensive values to speak of. Haven Knights charging in. They are going to be able to charge into the Serpent's Fangs as well, but there's significantly less room being made available to the Haven Knights, and with stuff like Trollmen continuously hunting them down, the Serpent's Fangs are pretty good in melee as well. Pikes are still around, even the most basic of the Harad units are spearmen, so the Haven Knights really do need to keep moving, otherwise they're going to be in real trouble. Black Swan Renegades are doing their thing, but they'll lose the Trollmen of Harad fairly handily. Harad spears. And now we can see the Grey Company have revealed themselves as well. The larger archers are here. What happened to the rest of the Arthedain army then? Are they taking the long way around? I mean, kind of, I suppose. Parking themselves up there isn't necessarily going to get them what they want. And biding their time, and Arthedain could yet go on to win this. It really does depend on how much damage the winner of the Dole Amroth or Harad conflict ends up taking to their opponent. With Dorwinion pretty much gone. I mean, with the Haven Knights here continuing to charge, fleet of projectiles, though, the Grey Company very much being a factor in this fight, and really any blob they perceive, none of their units are going to be in there, so they're going to shoot in. They're going to do a lot of damage to whomever it may be. Trollmen might be the best of the targets to go after, mind you, because they are the most dangerous target for Arthedain's remaining units that they will have to try and close the battle out with if they intend to go on to win the battle. Just in behind, the Haven Knights are still here. Gonna lurch forward. I mean, they are gonna kind of hit the Serpent's Fangs, but the stretched nature of that unit means that it wasn't actually that effective of a charge. And the quality that Harad have on foot is going to lead them to be successful here unless the Haven Knights can turn it around, or unless the Grey Company can help them turn it around. But yeah, with 2 units of Trollmen at various stages of being depleted, unit of Serpent's Fangs, the equivalent Dole Amroth units are not as strong. I mean, there's Knights of the Silver Swan, but they're even more depleted than anything Harad have left to offer. Haven Knight's going to retreat once more. There's still the Grey Company shifting around in the background there. Another charge. Victory seems certain for the civilians of all things. Southron Pikemen having their formations exposed. What's happening with that other unit of Trollmen? Going to try and finish off the Belfalas Marines. Another charge from the Haven Knights. It may have actually been better now in this battle to actually bring the Arthedain. They would have done crippling damage off these charges that the Haven Knights have been making, but the melee cavalry is not quite able to deliver that same level of damage in the same space of time. Belfalas Marines do end up routing. The Dorwinion archers are trying to run away. Civilians are still fighting with the remaining Southron pikemen. They are yet to rout. Haven Knights are going to be able to charge into this unit of Southron pikemen and probably finish them off. Slim pickings at this point, but forward come the Grey Company. What is the rest of the Arthedain army actually doing? Taking the very long way around. I mean, Dunedain Troll Slayers have revealed themselves as well, so some of the units, Arthedain in one way in the early game I suppose played it nicely, and that's that the Grey Company and the Troll Slayers didn't reveal themselves to be allowed to be charged by the Glade Riders, so that kind of restraint has helped Arthedain here because it's given them a chance of going on to win this battle in the long run. Haven Knights continue to charge, but Trollmen continue to hack their way through the basic Dole Amroth units that remain. Forward come the Grey Company once more. I mean, to be fair, with Troll Slayers, with Wardens of the North, Arthedain probably should go on to win this at this point with the continued damage that Dole Amroth and Harad are doing to themselves here. Rather stretched at this point, the Grey Company. Foul on man-at-arms. I mean, the Haven Knights, if they get in and amongst the Grey Company, that's very bad news for the Dunedain Riders. And they're going after, with body-piercing projectiles, what remains of this Harad infantry force. And yeah, I have to say, I don't think they can stop Arthedain at this point. Who would have thought that, given the dusting they were given early on by Dorwinion, that Dorwinion would actually be the first army on the field to fall in their entirety? And Arthedain would probably go on to win the battle. At least it's very much looking like that's going to be the case. Point blank hits onto the Serpent's Fangs. Haven Knights getting in and amongst Harad here, so continuing to go after Harad. I can't help but wonder if they haven't noticed the other Arthedain units that are on the way. A rather bizarre fight. A much faster one on the mountain pass than we've been used to seeing in the past, but there you have it. The Haven Knights really the only thing that Dole Amroth have left to them. Harad have got a few scattered units of infantry. There are the Troll Slayers on the way, all 74 of them, and Even the Haven Knights aren't really going to be enough at this point, because the Troll Slayers will be able to get a pretty vicious initial volley off, which will do most of the work against the remaining Haven Knights, and then in melee the two-handed axes will do the rest. Even if the Haven Knights were used perfectly at this point. They are not going to have what it takes. Continuing to go after the Harad units here, are they? Yes. Maybe vengeance is what they're looking for. Forward come the Troll Slayers, so I guess the question at this point is, what do they go for? Serpent's Fangs are on the way. Haven Knights need to be quite careful of the stakes that have been laid down. Serpent's Fangs are going to be able to charge into the Dorwinion Troll Slayers. I mean, the Troll Slayers may as well turn around and finish the Serpent's Fangs off. They will be able to a 2 hit point unit. They're not in a dense enough formation either for the Haven Knights to be super effective, and with the rest of the Arthedain units on the way as well. 47 men at arms. They're going after them. Serpent's Fangs continue to do their thing. Weird fight, this one. All of the action happened in 2 very specific points in the battle. The rest of it has been more sporadic. Many lulls in proceedings. A few armor-piercing arrows finding their way through. Serpent's Fangs. And they're going to try and use their javelins, and they are going to use their javelins, which is going to be enough to kill off couple more of those Haven Knights. I mean, they're incredibly tanky, the Haven Knights, as we've seen in this battle, but this is the kind of damage which they're not really going to be able to do a great deal about. Serpent's Fangs doing their best. Not going to be successful though. Wardens of the North are moving forward. Arthedain at this point need to just get their Wardens of the North into melee with the Haven Knights. Just get their swords to do the damage. It was a decent charge actually by the Haven Knights, killing off 9 of the Wardens of the North. It'll be quite the impressive throw. I mean, there goes the Harad General at long last. Could the Haven Knights yet give this battle to Dol Amroth? They really shouldn't. I mean, as soon as they get into melee, the Wardens of the North and the Troll Slayers will do damage to them. The problem is they both still have ammunition left as well, so they're ultimately going to end up getting shot by something. Trying to pad their kill count out a little bit by going after the weakest unit on the field that Arthedain still have left in their men-at-arms. I see how it is. It's understandable in a situation like this though. I mean, Dole Amroth have played reasonably well. I don't think they made the right decision early on with regards to how they handled the initial Harad defence, but later on it just turned into chaos really, and it's just about how you micro your individual units in and amongst that chaos, and I think Beastie70 did a pretty decent job at that. And Imrahil is the last one remaining. What's going on over there? Arthedain pikemen making their way down. Is Imrahil going to last a whole 1,000 frames in melee against these Wardens of the North? Or have we got more units that Dole Amroth have revealed? No? Has anyone got other units? Dorwinion, perhaps? They've got some units that can hide. Arthedain marksmen. Trying to pad their kill count out a little bit. I mean, if they continue to do this, they're not actually going to do any damage to Imrahil himself. He will continue to be able to use his sword to cleave through these hapless Dunedain. I think, as with a lot of the rest of this battle, this is a rather bizarre end to it, isn't it? Still, a close one. If for rather unorthodox reasons, it's been rather close. What are they going to do now? Surely they notice the armour-clad maniac which is continuing to hack their way through their units. The pikes are going to move in. I mean, this is definitely going to be the end of Imrahil, surely. Not going to last much longer now. I guess it goes to show how tanky the Haven Knights are, because the general model obviously is more is a souped up version of the unit that you put them in. They're goes to show how resilient Imrahil can be when he's riding with his retinue. Finally he's brought down, and Arthedain bring an end to this farce. And there we have it. Arthedain victorious. The last thing you would be expecting based on the early game, but this is the thing with free-for-alls, even if you end up getting absolutely battered early on, you can still make a comeback because of the reasons we've just seen. Only 311 kills, and yet Arthedain were the victors in this battle. If we were going by kills, then yeah, Dol Amroth have won, but you can't really go by kills all that easily in a free-for-all like this, at least not numbers like this, purely because Harad had a more numerous army, so of course Dol Amroth are going to get more kills, because that's just how it's going to be. In terms of the relative quality of the units, there is a way that you can do that. It's a points resolution, but you have to select that at the start of the battle, which they didn't, so we have to declare Parthen of Barsoom, or Panthen of Barsoom I should say, the victor as the army of Arthedain. So yeah, big thank you to Beastie for sending this one in. Let's see how he did actually. I mean, 444 kills on the Haven Knights, not too surprising to see them be the best performer in the Dole Amroth army, because they were the ones that were able to have free reign of the battlefield to a certain extent. And they did pretty well with it. Thalon Men at Arms, some of them did okay, some of them got absolutely dusted. Dorwinion Archers, they did okay. Dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan, that's not really enough considering the price of this kind of unit, but that's a common problem for them. And some of these units, well, Catapult got a decent amount of kills, but it was on very basic units. Again, it's one of the reasons why you can't really put too much stock in the amount of kills here, because again, a lot of the Harad army was relatively low-end stuff. Once again, big thank you to Beastie70 for sending this one in, and a big thank you to all the players for being a part of this rather strange free-for-all. Yeah, more of a bite-sized one this. I'm going to be going away for work again literally tomorrow, so I'm just going to be recording this one today to keep things ticking over. Although, to be fair, this one probably won't be out until about mid-March anyway. As for what's going to be happening moving forward, as I've said, I don't really know with this year. This year could go any which way possible, including staying exactly as things are. But yeah, it's one of those things that keep an eye out for a channel update, which will probably be happening April, May time. That'll probably be when I have a little bit more information which I can share with the rest of you, just to let you know how things are going to go and how this hopefully will positively affect the channel moving forwards. As for other stuff, I mean, it has recently I have noted that Rise of Mordor has actually been taken down, so that's something which I may address at some point, but basically it means that the Rise of Mordor stuff that I've been doing effectively comes to an end before it ever really finished, because, well, it ends before it ever truly began, I should say, because, I mean, there's no point in really doing it. I still have it installed on my computer, but there's no real point in it anymore, because no one's going to be able to download it that's new. There's going to be no updates that happen, so it's just kind of, I mean, it is what it is, isn't it? It's a bit of a shame, but I mean, we'll see what happens with regards to that, and hopefully it doesn't spill over into affecting the Medieval 2 mods, but Medieval 2 has been seen as a bit of a safe haven for modding for a long time, even with regards to Warhammer stuff, so I think we should be fine to continue as we are in this regard for the time being. But yeah, other than that, there's not really much else to be saying. So a little bit of a bite-sized battle, relatively speaking, this time around. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.